Feel free to stand up and stretch. Like, I won't take that at all. Like, my insecurities aren't on alert as everyone's walking out right now. I know you just have to pee or you need some more cantaloupe. Seriously, go ahead, stand up and stretch. I'm going to familiarize myself with what I'm trying to say here. Go ahead, stand up, stretch it out. We could do that awkward youth camp thing where you have to rub each other's shoulders, but that only works if you have the right partner next to you. Yeah, and then as you guys have a seat, we'll get into this. First of all, I know I need to stick to my notes. Like, you gave me 10 minutes. I'm not sure if I've ever given any talk in 10 minutes, so bear with me. I hope that you see what an amazing thing it is. Whatever you're thinking about your own commitment to the city, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Just what is happening here, what's been created. The people that were just on stage, I think I can say this unequivocally, that when we think about long-term vision, I have been either with Shauna, my wife, or our entire family on double dates with every single person up here. And you're like, well, you're like, no, it's just that we've all been here for a long amount of time, and we realized what we need in each other to do that, and to have the wide variety. And one of the favorite things that I do on a weekly basis, no, a daily basis, is connecting someone in our community with someone else in our community. I take great pleasure in that. Because of my role, I get access to a number of stories and just being able to connect people. So my assignment for these 10 minutes is to talk about what it would look like to be committed to San Francisco. And just, I was like, for the long haul, Will, or just committed to San Francisco. But I've got to tell you a story just to put all my cards on the table. I'm not sure I'm amazing at this. I met with a guy yesterday who used to be in our church community and now lives out in Concord. And I'm such an effective teacher that he said this. He said, it was your When Faith Moves series. That's the reason I'm no longer in San Francisco or at Epic. I'm like, this is great. It reminded me of the time that I talked about Sabbath, and someone told me after that message, hey, that message was so incredible that we've got to quit coming to church on Sundays. So I'm like, okay. So what I do want to do is to talk about having a vision for being here. And the first thing I want to do is just maybe acknowledge the assumptions that you have present because of my role here. Number one, you may have the assumption that I think everyone should stay in San Francisco for the long haul. Number two, you might have the assumption that having a vision to the city for the long term is somehow easier for me than it is for you. And number three, that Shauna and I have never asked this question: should we continue to live here? Should we continue to raise our kids in San Francisco? Should we continue to do ministry here? Because let's be frank, there are so many other places that are easier to do ministry, to afford, and to raise our children. They're all false assumptions, though. I do not think every person is supposed to stay in San Francisco for the rest of their lives, but I do think there are reasons to leave that are better than others. Having a vision to be here isn't always easy for me, but I'm beginning to find out in my life, Ben, easy was never the point. And it wasn't that long ago that Shauna and I were asking ourselves the hard questions about the future as it relates to San Francisco. Hey, we could probably go do some other things. Hey, we could probably have some things easier for our children. And so I want you to know, like, I am in this, and what I want to do is share a couple of different sets of perspectives with you from my vantage point, across really two big ideas. One is I want to compare my 2010 self to my 2017 self. I think that could be helpful. Because as you hear everyone talking up here, they're all going like 13, 15, 7, 10 years. So I want to tell you about my 2010 self and my 2017 self. And I also want to contrast the pastor me that so many of you know, and then the husband, father me that's just a citizen in San Francisco. Because I think it's really important, and I don't want to discount either. I don't want to set either down. I don't want to pretend like one doesn't influence some things that I do and what I might say to you, but also realize that the very personal side for me, I hope, is just something as a fellow citizen of San Francisco that could speak into you. One of the things that has transpired for me lately is that I get to do a pretty good bit of coaching, both inside our church, whether it be business leaders, certainly issues around faith. I take great joy in trying to coach our own team. I get to coach church planners from around the nation and around the world. And what I've had to start learning is that I can no longer coach them or allow them to be coached by me from my 2017 seat. Does that make sense? Because if you're coming into 2017 and going, hey, I'm a new person trying to figure some things out, I'm a new parent, I'm starting a new business, I'm starting a new church, I'm moving to San Francisco, people walk in here or they observe my 2017 life and they begin to compare their current reality to my 2017 reality. So when people come in here, they're like, man, if I could have a facility like this. I'm like, yeah, we were handed it when we moved. Or they're like, if I could have a staff that big or that competent. Yeah, if I could have that budget that you guys have at Epic Church, if I thought we could give a couple $100,000 to missions, if my kids were thriving, and so where I've had to start with almost everyone, and it isn't, by the way, that the 2017 version of me doesn't have challenges. So many close friends in this room who know about the kinds of challenges that I go through on a personal basis, that I go through as the leader of this church, that I go through as a husband trying to live the right way, and as a father trying to parent in the right way. There are constant challenges, even this week. Some things that took place on a personal level, because that's always happening. But what I've had to say to anyone that I'm starting to coach is like, hey, you need to know where this thing began. This thing began not with me having something that looked really stable. This thing began when Shauna and I, parents of a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, and 6-year-old, I was a teaching pastor at a mega church in the Midwest. It began with us going, hey, we're walking away from what's stable. We're walking away, if I can be honest, from what's easy. We're walking away from a guaranteed paycheck and a pretty sweet life and a 4-bedroom new house and all of these things. That's what we're walking away with, and we're showing up with a first grader that's going to be put in this lottery system, and we don't know where he's going to end up. That's where we're showing up. We're showing up where, will there be anyone in San Francisco that will rent us a space for a church, and will we be able to afford it? We're showing up with 13 people on a launch team, and literally me walking the sidewalks of King Street going, will anyone ever come here? We're dropping Elijah off at his school as a first grader, and for the first moment since we moved to San Francisco, and I would say the only moment since we moved to San Francisco, me asking, did we make the worst mistake of our lives? That's where we started. But what we also started with is this: hey, we believe God has us here. We're going to live out of calling, and we're going to give it everything that we have, and then let the chips fall where they may. I didn't know we would have this faith and work thing that we were doing for entrepreneurs. I didn't know that we would give $200,000 in year 6. I didn't know that we would have a space of 11,000 square feet that literally sits beneath Market Street. I didn't know any of those things. I didn't know that last Sunday, for the first time ever in Epic's history, that over 100 kids and students would show up on a Sunday. You're like, Ben, of course you would commit to that. I didn't commit to that. I just committed to giving it all that we had, knowing that this was the place. We didn't sign a 30-year thing. We didn't say, hey, we're going to be here for life. We just knew we had to give it all we had. Shauna has written on that. She's got a 30-day guide that church planners are using all around the country about how to really get invested in a city. We just knew that we were going to go for it. There were 2 questions that compelled us to move out here to start this church. One is, what if we lived the rest of our lives and never really went for it? And if this thing isn't going to work, it won't be because we didn't give it everything that we had. And so when you think about my 2010 self, that's where I want you to maybe compare yourself to, because you need to know a few things. Do not assume your challenges in San Francisco mean that you aren't called to be here. A calling is better than common sense. Doing the right thing when it's hard is better than doing the thing that is easy. We forget what our lives are to be about. And I was going to save this for the end, but let me just give you a few ideas. When you talk to your adult children one day, and they say to you, I know that, Mom, you and Dad spent 2 or 3 years, 4 or 5 years, 18 months in San Francisco. Can you tell me what that was like? And can you tell me why we moved? And I just want you to fast forward with perhaps these kind of answers. We moved because you didn't have a yard. We moved because it was hard to stay. We moved because it just wasn't the easiest thing on the planet for us to do. Now, there are some great reasons that you need to leave, but I always want to urge you, I always want to admonish you to go to somewhere else because God has somewhere else for you, and we always want to run to something, never away from something. So just make sure you're running to something. There's a text, right? I'm a pastor, so there's got to be this text I've got to use, otherwise my job's at stake. So I don't have a hard copy of the Bible, but there's a text that really provides, I think, a complete framework for how to think about being in a place for a long time. Provides a framework for how you and I should step into what God has for our lives and for our family. And let me just war against something real quick. My mind is blown when I hear people saying, hey, we're good to live in San Francisco for now, but we cannot do that once we start a family. I am blown that it's good for you, but it won't be good for your kids. I'm just blown away. And I'm not saying I don't recognize challenges, but when someone says it's good for me, but it's not going to be good for them, I'm like, really? Oh, I got to protect them. From what? From what? Why don't you just, anyway, all right, stop. I'm working through an equation, and it's not in a final product, but let me just give it to you. I think the equation for how to thrive and how to be committed for the long term in a place is it's a vision plus intentionality plus engagement rhythms plus dynamic community plus time. It's vision. It's knowing why I'm here and living out of that. It's being intentional. So if you're here for 20 years and you don't live intentional, you won't have the impact that some of us have had in the last 3 years. So it's intentional. Engagement rhythms are huge. One of the reasons our family can thrive here is because we get out of here. I believe you need to be fully engaged here when you live here. I believe to stay fully engaged, you have to disengage, and then you come back and re-engage. It's the idea that when you get away with family or to an island somewhere for 2 weeks, hopefully you come back. If it's still bad, you probably need to go somewhere else. But when you come back, you're ready to re-engage out of that. Dynamic community is just massive. We have to have each other as family, and so we have a stronger community here than you would have. Now, some of us, when we think about the word family, obviously for most of us, we're far from physical family. But San Francisco, like B said, it required her to do certain things. It requires us to have things present that I wouldn't have to depend on if I was in other places, right? If I can call my parents, which I would love to be able to do, and have them say, hey, would you just walk across the street? That would be amazing. But because I don't have that, we've got a young adult who's a part of this community and thriving that's taking Asher, my 9-year-old, to his baseball game right now. Stephanie's husband's picking up my 13-year-old for his baseball game. And so we have something, and the only word to describe that level of deep dynamic community is family. It's family. So here's what the writer of Hebrews, looking back on Abraham's calling, says about Abraham, and it's so good for what we're talking about. It said, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac. We're not going to advocate the tent thing unless that's what you want to do, but and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise, for he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. There are a few phrases I want to pull directly out of that text just to say, here's, I think, how you can have the vision for being here for the long term, for major impact. Number one, it says that he did this by faith. Abraham had lived in the same hometown for 75 years, and so when God comes to him, it's really the first calling in the scriptures in Genesis 12. When God comes to him, he says for him to go, and Abraham had to exhibit a faith to go that he would have never been able to exhibit had he stayed. I don't know about you, but San Francisco has required more faith out of me than any place I've lived before. But I hate that some days when I don't want to engage my faith. I love it most days. I love that God has to show up for us to have a space in downtown with this real estate market. I love that God has to show up for us to get into the schools. You're like, Ben, wouldn't you love to be able to move into a neighborhood and that guarantee the school like everywhere else in America, like 99.9% of America? I would love that, but it wouldn't cause the faith that I've had to exhibit. Right? So like, if you want faith, like move to San Francisco, start a church, raise your family there. I lived in Missouri, before we moved here, I was a teaching pastor, had a great salary, but I didn't have the weight of the leading the church on my shoulders. I taught once a week, and it was like the good life, but it was so unfulfilling because it didn't demand the kind of faith that this life does. Not saying it's better or worse. Faith is required everywhere because challenge is everywhere, but here I've had excess faith I have in other places. Number two, calling. If your calling isn't clear, you're not going to make it. There are days that all I have is my calling. I don't have any wins. I have no fruit that I can see. I don't have my right emotions, but I have a calling. Number 3 and 4 really are juxtapositions. It said that Abraham made his home in that new place, but then it says he lived as a stranger in a foreign land. Make your home here, no matter how long you think you will be here. Put stuff on the wall. Call yourself a San Franciscan. Everybody's different than I am on this, but get a 415 area code. Like when we see 479, like College Station, Texas, that's not legit. All right, 504 Baton Rouge, what? Who am I talking to? Oh, it must be somebody from somewhere else and probably going somewhere else. Make it your home. Make it your home. 561, it's okay. It's okay. It's not a staff requirement. Sorry, I just know a lot of area codes. I'm just South Florida for that one. Make it your home. He made it his home, and yet he found himself living as a stranger in a foreign land. And I think you've heard that out of Mary's talk, right? There should be ways you live because San Francisco is home, but there should be ways you live in your new home of San Francisco that makes you look like and feel like a stranger in a foreign land. Because we're ultimately citizens of a different kingdom. And so I want to keep that in mind. And then it says he was looking forward to the eternal city. That Abraham moved to this place because he cared deeply about eternity. I want to be straight with you. This is where I'm going to sound like I'm really trying to give you some propaganda here. So listen up. One of the reasons why we moved here, when we felt like God had given us a lot of freedom to move anywhere, is because we began to see that influence that begins here, it goes throughout the globe, and it goes throughout the future. Two things, I heard a talk on this recently, two things somebody said about life. They said life is really short and life is really long. And what they meant is this: of course, our lives are temporary compared to eternity. They're short compared to eternity. But we get, if God gives us health, we get decades and decades and decades of making maximum investment. And so, for me, as best I understand God's calling on my life, both from this faith piece and from just research. For those of you who are more feelers, anybody like more feeler in the room? Come on. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I'm there with you half the time. More thinkers? I need the data. Whatever you're at on that, I think for me, unless God changes, like does a 180 in my heart and mind, that the best place for me to impact eternity is going to be from this city. And so look at what's happened in 6 years and begin to ask this question: what happens at 10-year mark? What happens at the 20-year mark? What happens at the 30-year mark? What if we started asking if there's a way we can stay here instead of asking if there's a way we can leave? What if we could become family for each other, not to replace our physical families who may live far away, but to share such dynamic community that family seems like the only appropriate word to describe what we have? What if we use our short time on earth to invest in a place for eternity? We've sought to create the kind of community that allows you to thrive. I'm deeply committed to that. And most of this doesn't emanate from me directly, but indirectly, because I have a wife who's saying as we move here, you better pray for a kids ministry. You better pray for a kids ministry. You better start a student ministry. You better hire a kids pastor. I'm like, come on. So I have that, but I believe in the future. And I give access to anyone on the planet, and you guys know that. I meet with anyone who requests a meeting when it works with my schedule. But there's something about us in this room hitching our wagons to other people who want to go the distance. I don't think that's favoritism. I think that's investment. If you're going to be here with me for the long haul, then I don't have to consume things today. We are in this together for a long time to come. Now I'm going to hand it over to the woman who's written more about city impact than anyone named Pilgreen. Shauna.